Observe, and rather than imposing what you want, let your land tell you what it has the capacity to provide. I'm Kath Olive. I'm the project manager for Euroa Arboretum. Land class fencing, essentially it's dividing up the most sensitive parts of your land, so the areas that are going to be more degraded by grazing or by cultivation from other areas that are going to be more robust under cultivation or grazing. So it's separating areas of like into like. The benefits of land class fencing are mostly around landscape protection. So it's about protecting your ground cover, it's protecting your waterways, it's protecting your soils, it's protecting your native vegetation. So it's about identifying those key areas on your property and ensuring that when you fence, you're also looking at therefore how you may graze and use those areas. Starting with land class fencing, if I was walking onto a property, I would look at a general overview of what people were grazing their property with, so whether it's with sheep or cattle, or if they're doing cultivation, where the key areas are on that property that I would class as being sensitive. So the rocky outcrops, native vegetation areas, creeks and rivers, springs, or even just wet areas. So they would be my priority to be protecting. I'd also be looking at slope. So how steep are the slopes, north facing, west facing, south, east, how much vegetation is on those slopes. And I'd be looking at how do we work at protecting that, so protecting the natural values, as well as how do we manage that within a grazing system. Most paddocks respond better with short, sharp grazing. So a larger number of animals that are going to be grazing in a smaller area, so you have a more consistent, even grazing pressure, and then moved on, and the paddock that they've just left allowed to rest for a longer period of time. And by a longer period, we're not talking a matter of weeks, we're talking more likely a matter of months, although that changes seasonally. So the recovery rate for a paddock in a spring period is much shorter, as opposed to a winter or a summer period where you don't have rainfall, and that could take considerably longer for recovery. If you're a brand new landholder and you've just stepped onto your property, I would say just hold on. Don't go doing anything, ideally for the first 12 months, so that you've actually got a whole year to be looking at the seasons, where you've got wet areas, where you've got dry areas, how your landscape looks in different seasons. So that would be my first point, is just slow down. But then dividing up your property, you could either go into numbering it, or alternatively you can look at just really simple rules around where are your most sensitive areas that you want to be limiting or prohibiting grazing, to the areas that you can graze but under considered management on a more regular rotational basis, or areas that you might cultivate. So they're probably the most robust areas that you can put a tractor on.
Nature doesn't like bare ground, so nature's always going to grow something there. So if you can keep the stock off and stop eating it all, then I think you're in a fairly safe place. My name's David Freeman. I was the manager of this property, Coolabah, for about 30 years. It's 15 kilometres east of Seymour, 4,000 acres, 1,600 hectares. We're at the junction of the Whiteheads Creek catchment and the Hughes Creek catchment, so we've got water flowing both ways. When I first came to the property, there were a few large paddocks. Everything was set stocked, so there was no grazing sort of management as such. The big problems I had originally were large paddocks, and a lot of the big paddocks had quite deep erosion gullies running through them. And there are also areas of saline land and high rocky ridge tops. So I started off with electric fencing because it was the cheapest option. The paddocks were reduced by fencing out the break of slope, so the hills were fenced out from the undulating country. Also fenced out the dry gullies, and by doing that I put 2 rows of riparian vegetation either side of the gully, plus 4 rows of agroforestry that we were going to use for firewood later on. That sort of gave me quite a lot more paddocks. The saline areas that we have in the lower country, they were fenced out as well. They were sown to wheatgrasses and puccinella. The other country that's mainly undulating and tractorable, it's all been sown with a zero till now to perennial grasses, mainly phalaris, cockswood and subterranean clover. The stocking management changed from autumn lambing and set stocking to spring lambing and rotational grazing. The sheep were only sort of split up just for lambing and joining. The rest of the time they run in mobs of up to 2,000 in a mob. 2,000 is about my limit for drenching in a day. But it was easier to manage 2,000 in one mob than 4 mobs of 500. It sort of saved time. The paddocks, like I say, were rotationally grazed. There was never any need to muster because all you had to do was go and open the gate, let the sheep drift into the next paddock and come back the day after, a couple of days after, and close the gate behind them, which saved a lot of time. They were able to eat everything that was in the paddock, so they ate all the grass, all the weeds, and cleaned the paddock right up. They were moved on, and then those paddocks weren't grazed again until the perennial grasses had sort of 4 new leaves on them. So the roots had a chance to get the sugars back up into the plants and recover.